Hey there, welcome to episode 19 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. Today is the morning of March 20th, 2024, a sunny Wednesday here in Las Vegas. Today we're going to talk about something that's come up quite a bit in the news, a 4-year retrospective since almost to the day the lockdowns started in the greater Vegas area, or Nevada in general. 4 years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, 17th or 18th, but how appropriate, a 4-year look back, not only at the lockdown, but somewhat the aftermath, although that's worthy of another episode entirely. So yeah, just about 4 years ago, most places in the United States started some sort of a response to a global pandemic that was rolling out. Things that ensued during and after, interesting, educational for some, conspiratorial for others. All the chaos probably began before that, as more and more examination of the circumstances of the pandemic come to light. Will the answer ever be known? Not sure. That's not really what we're talking about today. A retrospective is often valuable, so let's have one. Wherever you get your audio program, such as this one, hopefully there's a episode description with our links. The first ones are, as usual, my shameless self-promotion, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, links to my various projects, audio programs, etc. You are under no obligation to buy anything or spend any money. You can if you want, and if you do, any funds that come in through the Buy Me a Coffee profile page or the Ko-fi.com as well, which I'll get to, goes towards actual coffee. All of my projects are powered by coffee. In fact, I've done an episode of Quaggling Sand about coffee. I became a home barista, small b, during the pandemic lockdowns. I've enjoyed coffee for many years, but became a main focus. Why not have coffee every day if you are stuck at home every day? So yes, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, links and a completely optional opportunity to contribute to the coffee supply. Ko-fi.com, as I mentioned, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Need to put that to good use. It's still there the whole time. On to the relevant links for this week's episode. The John Hopkins map. Was it a map? It was a map. It was some data collected, some time series data collected with various rules as far as consistency and diligence from around the world, really. Certainly people grew to check it frequently through the day. It was on many news programs. It was the inspiration for so many what you could call coding projects, I suppose. Yet more ways to visualize the same wonky data. I say wonky because time series data is sensitive to the nature of its collection. Sorry, my voice is always fighting with me here in my personal allergy capital of the world. The time series data is important to be collected in a rigorous manner. The spread of a virus, as I would learn by taking an epidemiology class, the spread of a virus is measured in time and space, so it's important to know how fast infection is occurring when you do your R-naught calculations for viral spread. Everybody became familiar with that briefly. You may not recall those by this many years later. So if you're going to collect data to represent how fast something is spreading, you need to collect that data in a consistent manner. I think we all learned to some degree that was not necessarily the case. So the John Hopkins map was certainly interesting. It was, in hindsight, difficult to base any real critical decisions on the data that was being provided. It was more of a utility than a authoritative resource. Hopefully, the NIH and the WHO and the people in that area had better data or better analytics, actual epidemiologists who are examining time series data from various places and saying, ooh, this is not very precise. Anyway, so the Johns Hopkins map, they ceased updating approximately 1 year ago. I think it's 1 year ago on the 23rd. I'm not looking at it at the moment, but I just checked it last night. I want to say, well, I'll look right now. I will look right now. But yeah, I want to say it was no longer updating as of, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, 3:10, not 3:20. March 10, 2023, 5:21 a.m. Oddly precise. Still has a few red dots on it. 676 million total cases. And their text formatting is wrong. It overflows. So yeah, 677 million. 609,955, I think it is. Total deaths, 6,881,955. Some other useful numbers there broken down by country, and it doesn't really, well, there's some other stuff there. Anyway, so the Johns Hopkins map became a staple for a while. Interesting times. Aside from stock market watchers, I can't imagine there was ever a time when people were watching charts so closely en masse. Maybe there was. This Week in Virology, a microbe.tv production, became my go-to. I basically was referring to the presentations there weekly by Dr. Vincent Racaniello and his panel of experts, including the clinical update with Dr. Daniel Griffin. So that was my sort of anchor, rather than hearing the conspiracy theories and the finger pointing and the angst. These were very professional people looking at it from a scientific perspective. If you're going to look for subject matter expertise, you should find it in subject matter experts, not podcast hosts, including myself. The program This Week in Virology was super informative and remarkably not political. They made a point of being apolitical, lest they raise the ire of their audience, which is good. And they're mostly, their audience was, and probably still is, actual medical researchers and doctors, clinicians, and so on. So their target audience held them to account often with some reasonable questions and so on. Dr. Vincent Racaniello, very interesting character. I highly recommend. And I also would read JAMA articles, but I have not linked there. They're a little bit more dry, but This Week in Virology still, and they have several programs on the microbe.tv network. So good stuff. I would watch it on YouTube. You can probably listen to it in audio form. Not a lot of video other than their smiling faces in their panel configuration. Talking heads in boxes, usually during the pandemic, during the lockdown. Coronavirus, the Wikipedia starting point, not the SARS-CoV-2 actual virus, but a wiki page on the coronavirus in general. People usually, they very quickly, in fact, became familiar with using coronavirus COVID-19, which is a disease, not a virus, SARS-CoV-2, and then any number of variations of problematic references like the flu, etc. So a starting point to refresh your memory if you're not familiar with what a coronavirus is, and then from there you can almost certainly find some more information about SARS, SARS-CoV-2, MERS. MERS, was that the virus or the syndrome? Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, I believe it was. So that's probably the disease. The disease versus the virus, two different things. You could have the virus but not have the disease. Probably not the other way around. So it's important to know that those are two different things. Definitely related. But I've been watching a few documentaries from the last year or 2 years ago, refreshers, pondering, and they use COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 interchangeably as though they are the same thing. It's important to be precise about some things, I think, especially given the scope and grandeur of the pandemic and its impacts. There was a really good book, recommended, of course, on an episode of This Week in Virology, Immune by Philip Detmer. Philippe, not sure, Detmer. I have a link to the Goodreads page, the actual, let me pull up this one, the actual title, it's Immune : A Journey into the Mysterious Systems That Keep You Alive. So fascinating read, fairly accessible, not a virology text, nor an immunology text, but definitely interesting read. Once you read this book, or once you delve into the intricacies of the human immune system, immunology, immunity, how it all works, how it sometimes doesn't, what we do know, and the vast amount that we do not know, we, humanity, not me. But once you read this book, or a book like it, and once you delve into how all this works, you have no choice but to question the authority presented by many people on the internets when they are making their case for some conspiracy theory or the efficacy of a particular treatment path, therapy, etc. So Immune by Philip Detmer, definitely recommend checking that out. It was really, 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 really interesting read. I might reread it, 4 years having gone by. And I just came upon this article yesterday. It was indeed published yesterday, the 19th of March, on NPR, that the NIH, the National Institutes for Health, has ceased their guideline publications. They're no longer driving COVID treatment. No more shots, no more therapies, etc. So their recommended guidelines are no longer active, I guess you could say. Read the article. So yeah, the end of an era is upon us. So yeah, 4 years already. CES 2020 was in January of 2020. It's right there in the name. I went. A lot of people did. I think it was a typical 180,000-ish from all around the world, as is typical for such a gathering with so many people and so proximal. You always catch a little cold, the handshaking, the being near each other, people from all over, and it's the winter, so seasonal illness, cold, flu, etc. So no real surprise. No one is ever really surprised if they return home from a trade show or a convention of some sort with a sniffle, a sore throat, certainly either from talking or actually getting sick, or both. So I know I was a little sick, a little under the weather. I doubt it was COVID-19, but who knows? There was something interesting though. So at the time, I happened to check the LVCVA, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, does publish visitor data, including cities of origin, especially domestic. And I found at the time, here's my little conspiracy theory, the top 5 around that year, 2020, of the top 10, top 5, and these are typically in the top 10 and are usually up around the top 5 in some ordering, and plus or minus 1. Seattle, Los Angeles, boy, if I could spell Los Angeles correctly, San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. Now, if you hearken back to 4 years ago, the first case of domestic in the United States, case of COVID-19, the first SARS-CoV-2 infection case was discovered in Seattle. That's where some of the time series data analysis started taking place, somewhere around, I don't know if it was UW, I can't remember, Seattle. And then Los Angeles had its cases, San Francisco, Chicago. New York certainly had massive infection case rates. So I found that interesting at the time, mostly because nobody knew what SARS-CoV-2 was. Well, not nobody, but certainly the masses. Nobody knew about COVID-19. It was seasonal sickness, so cold, flu, very common. So who knows? Who can say? Now looking back, you will read and probably hear and see on YouTube or from your favorite podcaster that people were getting sick with SARS-CoV-2 infection before January, February, March 2020, when it first kind of hit the radar globally. 2019, maybe even sooner. Depends on how much reading you want to do and how much you believe. Now science is as a matter of faith for some. But the case that it sprang out of nowhere is not really realistic. Something to think about. However, from my perspective, and I'm not trying to posit a conspiracy theory here, but I just found it interesting. so many people in town specifically for the Consumer Electronics Show in 2020, possibly infecting other people. At the time, the incubation time interval was something like 10 to 14 days. So but you were infectious for a certain number of days. If you happen to be visiting from another place into the Vegas area, and if you brought something with you, if you infected someone else, you may have infected someone who was based in Vegas at a resort, hotel, convention center, restaurant, bar, etc. So you may have infected another visitor, another convention attendee, a Vegas local. So it may have passed along, and then another week later passes along to someone else who's visiting from Seattle or from New York. That person returns home, they pass it on to somebody else. So it's the joy of infectious disease. They should have a whole branch of science dedicated to that. So I just found that interesting. I'm not going to pursue that here, but it was something to think about into the future. When you come to Vegas, keep it safe. What happens in Vegas may stay in Vegas, but what is transmitted in Vegas can follow you all the way home. At the time, I was in a long-distance relationship with someone in China. I had met her, I want to say, a year or two before. I had been to China a few times. Hadn't been to China in several months. How long was it? May have been a year. And so we would chat on WeChat, the preferred communication platform of the China population. So we would chat frequently, and I don't remember the exact date, but I did send her a message. I probably have a screenshot of it somewhere. Asking her if she had heard about this illness spreading through China. At the time, it was probably late January, started seeing mentions of people falling down in the streets, unable to breathe, people becoming more and more concerned, and so on. At the time, of course, not knowing from a global perspective that it might become a global pandemic, it just looked like an illness spreading domestically. Certainly, I mean, this can happen with a lot of diseases that become rampant, an outbreak. But there was no indication at the time that it could become a global pandemic. However, she had not heard about this. So she started making note shortly after. So it was on the radar. Shortly after, she made a travel plan and actually was able to travel for the Lunar New Year and was heading to the east side of China to be with family. If you recall from back then, in China, the Lunar New Year migration, visiting family, visiting home, going home for the holidays, is the single largest human migration each year. The vast number of people who are traveling to and fro. The Chinese government decided to lock down that initially, so there was to be no travel for the Lunar New Year. Well, she had just gotten in under the wire, so she was on the east side of the country. And initially that seemed like a nice thing, like, oh, okay, we made it, gonna visit the family. Unfortunately, the lockdown in China began very soon after, so she found herself stuck, luckily with family, but probably not planning to stay there for months instead of days. So it was a minor inconvenience, to say the least. Could have been worse, of course, but the take home, they were about 5 weeks ahead of us, give or take. So every day when we would have a chat about being locked down and how people are scared, and people are, in Asia, people wear masks all the time, but there was a heightened concern. There were rumors and so on. And this happened everywhere in the world, so not unique to China. But because they were several weeks ahead, she and I would talk every day, and I got a preview of how things might unfold here. So it was an interesting time to have that insight. She came out fine. I don't believe anyone in her family suffered illness or worse, so that was good. So it was an interesting time to be able to have that one-on-one insight from both sides. Now, on my side, I tend to do the reading. So while some people are into listening to Joe Rogan, doing their own research, which probably meant listening to more Joe Rogan, this may have been the inciting event, in fact, for our rampant outbreak, our pandemic of internet experts, which is problematic at scale, in my opinion, but that's a thing. I personally took a course online from Johns Hopkins. So Johns Hopkins was publishing that map, and they made certainly not a course for credit, but it was a sort of a short course, sort of an exploratory seminar with some testing, retention testing regarding how epidemiology worked. And so I figured, it'd be nice to know what all this means. So I took the class, very interesting. I wanted to understand the terminology and methodology. And that's where I gathered that the time series data collection and presentation required a certain amount of precision, which I found to be lacking here in Southern Nevada, just from outside looking in. So who really knows? I started to see, let me get a sip of tea here. I started to see that the incorrect use of some fairly specific terms, ironically, that's one of them. So specificity and selectivity were not always used correctly. The commingling of terms like quarantine and isolation, which are two different things. You quarantine if you've been exposed. You are isolated if you have been diagnosed with a particular virus. So if you are self-isolating, you are a case. If you are self-quarantining, or if you have been told to quarantine, that means you've been exposed, even though you might not be sick. Now, this caused some problems for people who are not aware. And I think probably because certainly in America, we're a culture of going to work sick, not taking sick days for various policy reasons, most likely. So going to work sick with a sniffle, having the fictitious sick building where all of your coworkers eventually get the same disease because of the closed heating system in the winter or whatever. It turns out, by the way, I remember looking into this, sick building is actually more likely sick transit. Illness between coworkers tends to follow commute routes more. So you may pass a disease to someone who sits near you in your workplace. That's not the ventilation, the heating, cooling, ventilation system. That's just proximal. You were within 6 feet of each other. But actual, city scale viral transmission tended to follow transit lines, transit paths, trains, buses, etc., more so than actually being in a building. So you can catch a virus from someone proximal, but it is not passed through the ductwork wherever you work. The use of terms like the SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 interchangeably, not completely correct. And I think credibility follows precise use of terms. When we become lax in our use of terminology and references to methods and specific details and specific time-stamped data, we leave room for conspiracy theories and so on. And this is nowhere more true than in the presentations from the likes of Dr. Anthony Fauci, who should never have really been given a microphone, in my opinion. The mask debate, the changing of this versus that, whether masks work or do not, only increased a credibility gap, did a disservice to the people who were working quite hard in their various professions: epidemiology, virology, immunology, general practitioners, emergency room, essential workers. These are all people trying to do their job with no agenda, and politicians at the top, unfortunately, well, they were that undoing, I think, in my opinion. The Southern Nevada Health District, like I said, was presenting some confusing data. This is the data that I watched most closely for obvious reasons. At one point, I did dive into their metrics sort of disclosure, and any particular data that they published was based on a particular case having any one of 5 dates associated with it. So it could be date of first symptoms, could be date of diagnosis, could be date of exposure, could be date of like maximal illness. I can't remember what the specific 5 were, but it was essentially varied by days, up to a week, really, give or take. So if you're trying to track how a virus transmits, you really want it to be as close as possible to the same consistent type of data with as reliable and precise a timestamp and location as possible. Another problem was certainly in Southern Nevada. This was probably true in many places because there was no vaccination protocol at the time. The therapies were dangerous, as it turns out. The use of ventilators and other practices, other attempts. These are all, trying. When you don't know, you try. You use what you have. You go to war with a virus with the army of tools that you have. To paraphrase one of my favorite quote sources. Anyway, at the time, nobody really knew much. It was a novel coronavirus, after all, with a lot of unknowns. So as people were trying to figure all this out, being precise in data and reporting on it in a useful way, and then when you didn't have the tools, people were only diagnosed if they were sent to a doctor. So some people were self-diagnosing, some people were being told to stay at home. There were really no treatments. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. All this stuff was changing all the time. Unfortunately, that is held against the people, the scientific folks, especially in authority. That is just unfortunate, the loss of trust in science. But I will say the Southern Nevada Health District, presented some confusing data, and their data handling practices, at least as far as the outside world, were troubling a little bit. There was a chaotic mess of testing uncertainty, of course, PCR, and more, what does it really mean? Is it 6 feet? Is it 12 feet? People being very pedantic. I think if there was a little bit more of a fireside chat approach, starting off with every day we learn more. What we told you yesterday may no longer be true based on what we have learned, not because we have an agenda, not because we're trying to play games, but that was not the case. So I think it's unfortunate. I don't think people have learned from this, but we'll see for the next one. I was a CERT volunteer, the Community Emergency Response Team, of course, a FEMA program. I had just taken my CERT training in June of 2019. As it happens, during that weekend, my dad was going into the hospital for some emergency surgery. So I think it was the next day, I headed down to Phoenix and spent a few days in Phoenix, learned about his situation. That led to my doing a tremendous amount of research on his situation. So I kind of had this mindset of, I want to know all the details. I want to know what the treatment options are, what the therapies, what the outcomes could be, and so on. That turned out okay. My dad's still around 4 years later. But the take home is you can listen to what the doctors say, even at a hospital, even the dudes with the white coats, male or female, doesn't matter. You can listen to them, take them as the gospel truth, their profound knowledge and insight. But you also have to look at what information they have available, what risks they are averse to, what their hospital policies are, and so on. So it's not always the words that they are sharing. It's the big picture to be considered. And the take home there for me was it is absolutely worthwhile to do the reading to find out more. So like I said, I started, for the pandemic, I started consuming JAMA, which is a sort of a medical professional information network, written YouTube videos, etc. And then, of course, This Week in Virology. So if you actually gravitate, if possible, towards subject matter experts who are sharing information without agenda, and if you do the reading, if you read all the articles, if you follow up on what does it mean, don't just trust the headlines, or certainly don't trust a non-subject matter expert. And by the way, while I like me some Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'm a fan of scientists in physics and math and so on. just because you are a physicist, and I'm no expert in any of those things, just because you are a PhD astrophysicist or mathematician doesn't mean you understand epidemiology, best practices, time series data, circumstances, right? You have a certain amount of insight. You know how to read a scientific paper, probably better than the average person, which is fine. But then to go off onto pontification because I'm a scientist, this is sort of the climate stuff from what's his name? The chemical engineer. Totally spacing on his name. It'll come to me. Science guy. Bill Nye, the science guy. So people are quick to point out he's a chemical engineer. What does he know about this and that? So to some extent, that's true. I think if you disclose that, if you say, I am making this assessment, I am giving my opinion based on adjacent background, somewhat relevant from a science perspective, but not necessarily subject matter expert when it comes to epidemiology, virology, immunology. Unfortunately, all of those gates were left wide open. So anybody with an opinion was treated as equivalent, which I think is problematic. Anyway, so I was a CERT volunteer. I had finished my training during the summer. So in January of 2021, when a vaccination program was rolling out after initial testing, the mRNA vaccines, both Moderna and Pfizer, was it? I had the Moderna shot, were available here in the Southern Nevada area. So I was activated to work at a vaccination pod. I can't remember what pod stands for. But it was a place where you could go and get your shots. So it was a pod operated by the city of North Las Vegas for city employees, first response, and other sort of frontline exposed to the public in the risk group first. So a lot of elder residents were coming by to get their first and then later second shot. As a volunteer, I was able to get my Moderna shot. So I got a Moderna shot on the first day, and then whatever the number of weeks were later, got my second shot as a volunteer. I think I volunteered a total of 5 times over so many weeks. And my role, I think every time, I may have had a different role once. My role was to, if you remember, if you got your shots, you get a shot. You are given the shot, ideally in your upper shoulder, hopefully given by pinching the muscle and injecting the vaccine into the muscle, not into the joint, not into the connective tissue, into the muscle. This was not always the case because they were enlisting so many people to do the actual inoculation with the syringes. The type of syringe, the exact dosage, the methodology of loading the syringe was all sort of changing, done on the fly, best guess, honest, trying, but not always on the money, so to speak. So that was an interesting time. My job was to watch people after they had received their injection. There was a 15-minute waiting period before you could depart on the off chance that you might get into your car and then have a or even walk down the street, walk on the sidewalk, hopefully, and have an adverse reaction. So they found that in the first 15 minutes, if you were not feeling dizzy or otherwise feeling any symptom onset, that you were probably okay. Through all of the times I was there, occasionally people would feel a little bit woozy, possibly because of anxiety over receiving the injection. Who likes needles, right? One person, I did have to get the EMTs who are on site, and they actually took her away to a hospital. She was having an active adverse reaction. So I had one outcome where I was actually glad I was there, I guess. It was a really chaotic time. Nobody was exactly sure, well, do I need to get the second shot? Should I come here in 2 weeks or 3? There was some confusion over the fact that you had to come back. It was a chaotic time. It was an interesting time, very educational. As a CERT volunteer, that's what you're there for, to try to help out, So from a community service perspective, it was nice to be involved. And of course, I got my shots early. So I was not at the time in the risk group, but I was able to get my shot, which was good for me because I would eventually go to, what was it? Anyway, I felt more comfortable, I guess. There was nothing magic. I felt more comfortable in my public dealings. Eventually I would return to Phoenix, but I wanted my parents to be inoculated because of the fact that my dad had just gone through that hospital situation. So I convinced them to get their vaccinations, even though they would have preferred not to, I think. And it goes out from there. So the confusion over whether it was a sterilizing immunity or a protective mitigation, to this day, they lied to us. And it was mostly because if you were watching This Week in Virology, they were very clear. It is not a sterilizing immunity. This will not prevent you from getting sick. It will not prevent you from becoming infected. It will reduce the effects and it will reduce the likelihood, but it's not outright prevention, not sterilizing immunity. So when the news people use simplified language, when they confuse terms, when they say get the shot and you won't get sick versus it's a prophylactic but not a sterilizing immunity treatment, it is not going to automatically make you immune. And by the way, that's another casual lack of understanding of how immunology works, how our immune system works. You'll hear this sometimes. Well, I had it, so I'm immune. And the answer, of course, is, do you know anyone who had it twice or 3 times or 4 times? Just like the common cold, just like influenza, you may be quote unquote immune until a variation comes along or until your immune system is finished reacting to the immediate infection, but maybe a suitable level of immunity was not developed or didn't have time to develop. Magical immunity was not necessarily conferred automatically. It was not something that was completely understood. I don't even know if it's understood to this day, but yeah, I'm immune. I already had it. Well, how many times did you have it? Twice? Okay, well, that's not how that works. And then, of course, personal immunity versus the ability to transmit and whether someone else could get it. Like I had my injection. Well, but you could still pass it on to somebody else. You could still become infected, but not suffer as intense a collection of symptoms associated with COVID-19, whichever the variant was. Could you transmit it to another person? Perhaps, right? These were things that will be understood more over time. That's how science works. But the science of public opinion, that's a whole different thing. So I did my serve volunteer community service. I'm glad I did it. It was fun, interesting, educational. Of course, I did have early access to both of my Moderna shots. I did eventually, for the following year, get 1 booster for CES 2022. That was interesting. That was an interesting show. That's a whole nother topic of conversation. But I did get the shot, and I did have really intense side effects, extreme fatigue. It just felt like I got run over for about 2 days, and then I was fine. Went to the show, didn't really get sick as far as I know. I was doing the mask. As we know, the mask is more about transmission than becoming infected, but all manner of rumor and layman science on that topic. So during the pandemic, during the lockdown in particular, the gym was closed. I used to go to the gym a couple times a week, like every other day. I would walk 3.3 miles each way, uphill both ways, to my local 24-hour fitness. Well, 24-hour fitness would eventually suffer some drastic financial downturn. Their circumstances did not go well. But the gym was closed. I was not able to visit that gym. I would occasionally visit the very teeny tiny gym that they had at my apartment complex where I was living. But I mostly took to walking. So instead of walking 3.3 miles each way, I would walk every other day. I would walk about 3 to 4 miles every day, get outside, get some fresh air, and so on. I would walk to the grocery store where our first responders were doing their important work. I would very rarely come upon other people when I was out walking in the neighborhood. If we did pass each other, people were very pedantic when it came to distances. They would step off into the street or whatever. And because there was nobody really driving, it was fine. So all was well. There are various people nowadays who will shake their fists at the idiocy of wearing a mask outdoors and wearing a mask while you're driving and so on. I think personal best practices, trying to keep yourself and perhaps your loved ones, perhaps you would return home and you wanted to make sure you didn't bring anything extra with you. Driving in your car, who knows? Maybe you were an Uber driver. Maybe you were you just dropped off the kids at school, or well, not at school, but at a neighborhood. What is it? Education pod, I think they call them, or homeschooling pod. So it's always possible that people were in your vehicle and you just had the mask. I know there are circumstances that were beyond the awareness and thus opinion of various people. And so ranting about what other people were doing became the big thing. Now, unfortunately, so many times that would turn into, well, I'm wearing my mask, but you're not wearing yours. And it would be altercation. It would make for a good TikTok or other video fun. That's how we are. But I would go walking every day, which I still do, even though I do go to the gym also. My trips to the local grocery store, I think 0.6 miles, so not too bad. No need to drive. I actually had sold my car several years before, so no car to worry about, no trouble. So I'd walk to the grocery store every day or two, pick up a couple things. The idea was to not stay too long in the grocery store, so I wouldn't go shopping for a week, walk over to the store, pick up 3, 4, 5 items, head back home, go back tomorrow or the next day, etc. Turns out the Smith's grocery store that I would go to every day or so was one of the early cases that was published from our Southern Nevada Health District. So somewhere right on the map, a Smith's employee had an identified, diagnosed case of COVID-19. Interesting. Of course, all the essential workers who were working there and at the Centennial Hospital, 2 blocks away, completely underappreciated. That is also how we are. I kicked off some podcasts, including this one, Quaggling Sand, first aired in first episode published on March 22nd, 2021. So about 3 years ago. You can still check those out, by the way. I published them on the Spotify for podcasters. So they're all still available wherever you found this one, probably. The Quaggling Sand homepage will be coming very soon now that I've completed some other administrata for our nonprofit. It's on the list. Publishing so that they can be discovered. Various types of content, audio, video, etc. So you are not subject completely to the recommended or for you page or whatever. Still most definitely at the top of the agenda. So quagglingsand.com will be coming to life any day now. Check it out. In the meantime, the old episodes are still available. So got into the podcasting. My mother and I, because we were talking on the phone about my dad all the time, we were like, hey, we should do a podcast. So we had a podcast. My mom has been a podcaster for years in Phoenix. So kicked off the podcast projects, the FFS and Quaggling Sand. We're up and running. Working remotely, I did some remote consulting projects. That was sort of interesting. My line of work, software mostly, software engineering, software architecture, pretty easily done remotely. I would say for the remote consulting projects that I did work on, I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with the people in person. So good news there. During the pandemic, right before, we were trying to get the Nevada Mobile Vendors Association, NMVA, up and running. It was a 501c6 business league for mobile vendors, food tents, food carts, sellers and purveyors of food, drink, and wares. your typical First Friday farmers market cadre of small business owners. So we were getting that up and running prior to the pandemic. Once the lockdown started, once the mobile vendors, especially food truck people, were going rogue, probably not universally appreciating the distancing and other safety measures. And again, all these safety measures, you can look back and with perfect hindsight, and which you still don't have, by the way, that was unnecessary. But at the time, it in situ, contemporaneously, best practice is trying to keep people from dying. So I fault no one for what you could say would be overreacting, although it's not clear that it was overreacting. But anyway, I'll leave that there. So our owners association sort of fizzled out. So such is life. So working remotely, keeping distance from other people turns out to be okay. Working from home versus WFH versus RTO, return to office, is still a lingering concern this many years later. We'll see how the world turns. But we do all have probably better internet connections and a greater familiarity with how a web camera and microphone works. And of course, there were more and more podcasts, whether they were Joe Rogan or more useful. There's room for everything. I think we're still learning. Conspiracy is and probably always will be the word of the day. It is itself a conspiracy, perhaps. The way to get views on YouTube and whatnot is to be extreme, to be provocative, to have a good thumbnail with taunting language, the joys of yellow journalism way back when, which I've already done an episode, I think it was on FFS Talk, about sensationalism and so on. So the more inflammatory, the more conspiratorial, the better. It's profoundly unfortunate. The side effect seems to have been, and I don't see that it's going to diminish, is a general lack of confidence, a loss of perceived credibility in science. Scientists, scientific research, scientific publications. We can discuss and debate and lament the peer review process and how it's become politicized and so on. But the fact now that anyone can publish anything, anywhere, anytime, and it is leveled such that, Dr. Vincent Racanello or Dr. Daniel Griffin, a clinician, so he would talk about both the research side and the on the ground, in the emergency room, in the hallways of a clinic, of a hospital. So on the ground, what he is seeing as a subject matter expert. Vincent Racanello is a professor, teacher of virology, I believe. Not necessarily immunology, but he would have a panel of immunologists, epidemiologists. So these are subject matter experts. When their views, thoughts, conversations are placed on the same table as discussions with random people expressing broken, ill-informed opinions, when all those are treated as equivalent, we have a problem. I was more concerned with the near-term health of my parents and family, my loved ones in other countries, including China, and understanding what the immediate best practices were and still are. I would say to people, if you are in a fire, if your house is on fire, the time to figure out what caused it and who to blame is after you have left the building. So I was more concerned with the short term, making sure people didn't get sick, or if they got sick. I'm pretty sure I got COVID at least once. I certainly had the symptoms. I have no shortage of COVID tests, which I received for free from our government. I received an entire box of the Abbott tests when I was at CES because they had so many, they didn't get rid of them. So they said, "You want a box?" So I think I have like 40 test kits plus the various variations of different manufacturers through the free delivery period. Go to this USPS and sign up for your free test kits, which they never gave you enough. If you had a family, they'd give you enough for one or two people, but not like, I have a family of 8 people. No, too bad. But I still have all these probably expiring, although as people have pointed out, people in the know. Even though the tests are stamped with an expiration date, nobody knows for sure if that's valid. So they just went with like, well, give it a year or whatever the stamped date was. Nobody really knows. So we're all still learning, even though the NIH has put a stop to their guidelines, recommendations for treatment and so on. The fact is, it's in the history books. It is a virus that can be caught. It can be the cause of infection with some symptoms and the possibility of transmission and so on and so on. I think the lessons learned from looking at data every day, coupled with the doubt, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD that was layered on top of it, has done a general disservice to the tendency of the public at large to maintain a level of awareness and understanding about a particular circumstance. It could be economic, it could be biological and virological. It's very easy to blame inflation on the sitting president, when if you actually look at the data and you look at the charts and you look at profits and you say, hey, wait a minute, why are prices going up, but then companies are reporting higher profits? True inflation should lead to a devaluation of the loss of purchasing power of the currency. It should not lead to increases in profits. What's going on here? So if you only want to rant and you don't look at the data, which is what happened during the pandemic, which is what happens in so many things, it's fascinating. We have a lot to learn as a population. We need to be better about understanding, about doing some research, about understanding subject matter expertise and credibility of our sources, not overly politicizing things. And of course, none of the things I just said will ever happen. So such is life. The origin of the virus is still a point of contention. The unfolding of the illness, the handling then and now of research, data, and vaccination process, background, whether they were properly tested, which one of these days look up how chickenpox vaccination was tested. The challenge, you'll say to yourself, "Ooh, okay, that was worse." That was worse. But ultimately a good thing. Public health is a problem most people don't fully understand, myself included. Being responsible, accountable, but at least trying to manage public health at scale. When you're talking millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people, there will be mistakes. So hopefully we learn. Unlikely we do. I personally found that attempting to become informed, again, I did my own research, but I didn't read what other people said. I was reading research papers. I was listening to the likes of Dr. Racanello and his panel of experts weekly, reading from there. Like I said, I read that immune book based on a recommendation from that podcast, and it was a fascinating book. Understanding how PCR works, understanding how a lipid envelope works. I actually have a friend who was working at a lab, not at Moderna or Pfizer, but was it Pfizer? Am I getting that right? Was it Pfizer or Moderna? Anyway, I don't think it was Pfizer. Who? Okay, I'm going to look that up. But anyway, somebody I knew had been working on mRNA platforms, and they actually started tackling it because of the initial SARS outbreak. And so when the first SARS took place, and I was working at UMass at the time, so this was what, 1999? So when SARS virus was moving through parts of Asia, there was an initial desire to look at an mRNA-based vaccination platform. So it was already a work in progress. So for people to say, oh, they just came up with this, was not true. So who... Moderna... Oh yeah, it was Pfizer. Okay, Moderna versus Pfizer. So mRNA will be used for other things as well. So it's not just for the coronavirus. Totally interesting. Another area of personal research for you to take on, just to learn about how it works and how it doesn't, what it does, what it doesn't do. That will help you to become more informed. Did you hear that motorcycle? Yeah, the joy of producing content near a street. At least I'm indoors. So So being able to consume a variety of sources, being able to compare and contrast, this is generally useful as a life skill. So it's always a good opportunity to take advantage when there's a circumstance like a pandemic or an economic downturn. Who should we blame? Well, understanding the scenario first and continuing to understand the scenario as details change, as details emerge, is an important life skill. So I don't know if people honed that particular skill, but I like to think that I continue to do the reading. And, well, we'll see. It was an educational process for me, to be sure. Maybe for you as well. So some big lessons. It was quite heartening to see so many normal people step up to pitch in, whether it was attempting to build out ventilators, which is probably dangerous. If you look at how ventilators really work, then having normal people just cook them up with spare parts. And I do appreciate the maker movement. Totally appreciate that companies like Tesla, maybe, which I don't think any of the things that they built actually put into practice, put to use, put into service, as they say. So whether there was actual return on this, but the fact that people are trying to do something is probably the more valuable outcome. People were making masks of various kinds, whether they were effective, whether the general use of masks, whether the type of masks that people were making, whether the material selection, whether the construction, whether the use of masks, whether you had your nose hanging out the other end was, an indication that people have no idea what they're doing. But the fact that people were trying is probably noteworthy. Certainly early on, we all recognized that some people had to go to work. The essential workers. They're so easily overlooked and underappreciated. And of course, today we are right back to where we were. We overlook and underappreciate them. And of course, they are forgotten. This is the nature of humanity. Can't do much about it unless everyone becomes an essential worker. And then you start to say, hey, how come nobody cares that I'm trying to do some work here in a dangerous situation? If you are a first responder, if you are on the front lines of any crisis, you have a unique insight and so rare that you are fully appreciated for your work. So thanks, everybody. Many small businesses suffered. Wealth transfer was phenomenal to the rich, obviously. And the fingers of blame have been pointing ever since, and justifiably so. Small businesses didn't need to suffer, but it was, at the time, a contemporaneous decision made in the interest of public health, not necessarily the best decision on the best information, but it was the information available at the time. Certainly small businesses that suffered closure, and not only small businesses, should have received fair support from local and other levels of government. Obviously, some of the programs that were put in place were rife with corruption, people stealing, taking advantage. This is very unfortunate, but again, human nature, it is what it is. It's hard to make good decisions on bad and changing information. You make as good a decision as you can make, and you go from there. There's in light of our spate of aviation drama of various kinds, there are 3 rules when it comes to flying a plane. You aviate, you navigate, and you communicate. That is, you keep the plane in the air, you figure out where you're going and where you are and where you're going, and then you tell the ground about it in that order. You cannot possibly tell the ground everything that's going on in great detail as a priority if you are not managing to keep the plane in the air. So similarly, preventing people from dying as best as could be accomplished, keeping businesses open, not the highest priority at the time. That is certainly the subject of argumentation after the fact. But during, you have to deal with the circumstances at hand. So massively unfortunate, but then so was dying from virus, and the sad stories of people dying alone because the hospital wouldn't let their family into it. I mean, these are all horrible, great potential educational circumstances for the world at large. Lessons probably not learned. Political games and information vacuum together were not helpful. using a pandemic, people dying, finger pointing on who's benefiting, blaming inflation on free money, on all these things that if you talk to a real economist like Mark Blythe, or if you actually examine the situation, public health crisis versus my personal comfort level, like I shouldn't have to wear a mask because given the information at the time, a lot of bickering, a lot of selfishness, again countered by the people who did actually try to help. But the political games and the information vacuum were problematic. They led to, no doubt, to a loss of trust, a continued bifurcation of people at large. When you can guess whether someone's been inoculated, whether they've received their vaccination shots, when you can correlate directly political party and status of vaccination, perhaps that's a problem. Long COVID may well be a biological illness. It may well be the lasting effects of having been infected by the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the ensuing COVID illness. But certainly it has taken a social form that will be even longer lasting. Our education system in the U.S. was not up to the task. That's probably the biggest lesson. Very, very close second, or maybe even tied for first, is the ability for the public at large to understand a public health emergency and what needs to be done when information changes every day as far as emerging awareness, actual scientific research, the detrimental effects of opinion that is not based on fact, but on conspiracy theory, which turns out to be wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But our U.S. education system, possibly other places as well, but in the U.S., the notion that students had to remain home and participate in classrooms online, the complete and total breakdown, the loss of years of education during that time and future potential, the impact that will have on the next generation of, the Gen Z, I suppose, Gen Z workers, the Gen Alpha, who will learn from their millennial and Gen Z parents based on this experience, the ripple effects of our failures as far as continuing to educate people, especially students who are not able to be in the classroom with their peers and with teachers and so on, is probably the big take home, regardless of the state of a global pandemic or a local flu outbreak, a norovirus outbreak, et cetera, et cetera. There are a variety of circumstances that will impact the ability of students to attend classes. Here in Southern Nevada, it is teachers having a sick out, ironically, trying to make lawful their ability to strike, the teachers' union, the ability for them to negotiate with a strike option, which has been used so effectively by the culinary union. So the teachers' union would like to strike to get better terms. That's a longer story, but the take home, education systems everywhere were put to the test, and it doesn't look like they really passed. And in fact, if you really look around, have education systems usually at the county level, the school district level, have they done anything to proactively account for future similar circumstance? If you live in a place with extreme climates like snow, you may be familiar with a snow day. Anything longer than a day or two is total chaos. And I think that's the take-home lesson from all of this, is that in general, our legacy systems are based too much on the fact that they have not been challenged. Like an immune system, every once in a while you got to throw something insurmountable at your systems and see what they do. And when they don't work, when they don't rise to the challenge, you have to really look at what we would call we'll just say it's a retrospective. You can look back and see what worked and what did not and what you can do about it. And I think that has yet to be done in a truly effective way with our education system, which is so critical for the future. and as well our political system. We're having another election coming up, and there will be just as much bickering about mail-in ballots and complete lack of understanding of how ballot counting works. I worked at a polling place. These, here again, are people that are just trying to do their job. They are accused of all things. They're just trying to do their quote-unquote civic duty, to be a part of the process. That's why I did it. The people I worked with were totally above board, no shenanigans. The whole process of turning in ballots is still very, very casual. You put seals on things and you sign things and you deliver. I think I delivered our ballot container. We put them all in this big giant case. You put a lock on it. You have like a sealing lock of some sort so that you know it's not been tampered with, a tamper evident closure. You sign some documents, you put some sort of tape or whatever it was. I can't remember, but then I put the thing in my car and I drove to the drop off point for our locality. And you just have people in cars dropping off these containers of ballots, everybody doing their part. It would be super easy to assume, without knowing, that people are doing something nefarious. So here again, you have to look at what works and what doesn't. Well, this works until you inject some doubt, until you point an accusatory finger, and then you can start to see, oh, all of this is based on the goodwill of volunteers. All of this is based on teachers who are not paid enough, on an infrastructure that's not able to suitably have students participate in a virtual classroom, to educational materials that are not suited to homeschooling or self-driven, self-directed learning daily. And the list goes on. So a lot of the critical components of our various infrastructure elements, pillars, I think were tested and many need help. Nowadays, it will be our water and other critical infrastructure, electricity, water, etc., that will come under cyber attack. Here again, nothing will be learned. We'll have a workaround. Like, okay, now it works. We don't have to worry about it anymore. You haven't fixed the problem. You've only fixed the symptoms. I think the same is true of our education system. So that's where I'm going to leave it. An interesting time, certainly a learning lesson for all. I'm sure everybody took something different. 4 years already. The fun economy is back. The empty streets. I think the casinos, resorts were shut down for, I think it was 78 days, 70 something days, 73, 78. A big drive for economic diversity so that we don't have to depend on, tourism has made a giant comeback. Oh, okay. So we don't have to worry. We don't have to worry so much about economic diversity. Make no mistake, in Southern Nevada, the fun economy rules, and rightfully so. Take home. That's where I'll leave it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for walking down memory lane with me. Hopefully you had an interesting time, an educational time. Maybe you started a small business or two. Maybe you started a podcast. Maybe you just took some time for yourself. Maybe you found some weaknesses in our education system or in government or how elections work or how information is shared. Anything's possible. And on that note, I will thank you for listening. Don't forget, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, DANHUGO, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Visit these for more information about the various audio and other productions, content creation, other projects, and so on and so on. There will only be more. I know I talk about this every week, but as I whittle away at my to-do list, more of the things that will be more obvious are bubbling to the top. And just stay 6 feet away from everybody. You'll be better off, and so will they. Thank you for listening.